Morning and welcome to today's Crop Hour. I'm Jack Davis, a Crops Business Management Field Specialist out of the Mitchell Regional Office. Today we have Laura Edwards, our SDSU Extension and State Climatologist, and she's going to present. And then following that, there'll be a short poll, and we'll move into Julie Meyer, who's a Missouri River Senior Hydrologist with the Missouri Basin Forecast Center. So I'll let each of them introduce themselves a little more as they go through. And then at the end, we'll show the CCA credits. So you can scan that for your credits, and that'll be after both presentations. So I think we'll go ahead and get started, and Laura will share her screen, and we'll go from there. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, thank you, Jack. And I see Julie is on too, so she'll be ready a little bit later. Nice to see you, Julie. And you can turn your camera off, Julie, until your turn if you want. So I'll start here with the first half hour or so, talking about the spring, and I'll get into the summer too, outlook of what we see out ahead of us. And I'll kind of start with where we've been here just recently. So starting with temperatures so far in February, gosh, they've been really warm, right, guys? We're looking at temperature departures or difference from average in the eastern side of the state exceeding 15 degrees, especially in the northeastern part of the state. They've kind of cooled down a little bit over the last week, but really exceptionally warm there in the east. But still the west, nothing really still warm in the west as well. 3 to 6 degrees above average around the Black Hills area, 6 to 9 to 12 degrees above average for February so far in the Plains region of the west. So really quite exceptionally warm, similar to what we saw in December, which was record warm for a lot of parts of South Dakota as well. So we've kind of bookended the winter with warm on both ends and just a very brief period of cold in between in January. So look where we stand as far as temperature ranking so far. This is from the Southeastern Regional Climate Center. They do a really great job of using our daily updated data from some of the key weather stations, climate long-term stations across the country. And Aberdeen so far is ranking 3rd warmest for February. Huron 9th warmest. Down in Sioux City, 3rd warmest February on record. And you see that around eastern Nebraska as well. But up in Fargo and a lot of the stations in Minnesota first are running warmest on record for February. And I'm sure you all have heard the stories of very little ice, very little snow all across the region, and certainly that's playing out in the temperature records too. So with only a few days left to go in the month, we're going to be easily top 5 for a lot of areas here in the northeastern part of South Dakota. If we look at the winter so far, and by meteorological winter is December through February. So since December 1st, very similar rankings there. Aberdeen 3rd warmest so far, and we see some of those warmer anomalies, those warmer departures in the northeastern part of the state. Huron 7th warmest winter so far. Sioux City similar, around 7th warmest. So wouldn't be surprised when we get to the end of the month here that we'll see a lot of top 10, top 5 ranking winters overall. This is very consistent with strong El Nino as we have in place this winter. And by strong El Nino, we're looking at something around the top 5 to 6 strongest El Ninos this winter season, December through February. And consistent with that, we often see warmer than average temperatures in the north central states, and that's exactly what's played out. On the precipitation side, though, a little bit mixed bag so far for precipitation for February for the first 3 weeks here. This is looking at the percent of average or percent of normal precipitation for February so far. So the greens, blues, purples are wetter than average for the month. The reds, oranges are below average for the month so far. So you kind of see, across the northern tier, we're seeing some dryness there for February. Along the Black Hills, and you kind of see where that snowstorm kind of passed through Highway 34 corridor, right through kind of the middle of the state with some purple dots there. And just goes to reinforce and kind of echo the comment that I say a lot is that February is one of our driest times of year. It only takes one or two big storms to get us above average in a hurry. So that's all it takes. So again, in the north and the southeast, really haven't seen much to speak of, but where we've seen some snowstorms through the central and south a little bit, seeing a little wetter conditions for February. Looking at the winter overall, how we've ranked for precipitation, really kind of middle of the pack, maybe on the wetter side of the middle, but certainly up in, if you look to the north and east a little bit, Fargo, St. Cloud are ranking much wetter. For the month of December alone, I'm not going to show December, but for the month of December alone, we did see some counties in the northeast with their record wettest December, but so that's kind of skewed some of the winter overall, mostly because that Christmas storm event around that time of the month. Aberdeen so far 14th wettest, Huron 21st wettest, Valentine 20th, Sioux City 13th. So not quite top 10, but leaning a little bit on the wetter side. And again, mostly because of December. Looking at drought, which is kind of the other flip side of this, we do see drought in some parts of South Dakota, particularly the southeast, centered more or less around the Sioux Falls area, and also out west in the Black Hills, which I won't linger on too much here today. That is more of what I would call a snow drought that has emerged over the winter season. Hasn't really affected agriculture, at least yet, as far as reservoir, water supply, anything like that, as it's kind of emerged in the winter season, but more on the tourism, recreation, and the lack of, revenue and the economic impact thereof. Also, worries about fire risk, actually in both sides, both east and west, as far as lack of snow cover, and fire with dry fuels out on both sides of the state. And you can see across the region too, still some lingering severe drought, severe to extreme drought in eastern Iowa. And again, not a lot of snow around many of these areas. And so people are taking a close look everywhere across the region with this really unusually warm and snow-free or very little snow season. In fact, it's kind of funny that state of Kansas, some areas there have had more snow this winter than some parts of South Dakota, and then a lot of parts of South Dakota actually. So really kind of an unusual winter this year. Just to zoom into South Dakota, here we are. I should have thrown in a change map to see how drought categories have changed, but I forgot to do that. Again, the D1, that drought area over Sioux Falls, the southeastern part of the state, and that surrounding D0, that abnormally dry, the yellow shaded area, are artifact of kind of two different things. One is very long-term, we've had dryness or drought, ebb and flow over the last couple, 2 to 3 years, and also just the short-term, the seasonal dryness as well. We've essentially, and I think Julie might touch on this too, we've essentially melted our snowpack about 4 to 6 weeks early, a week or two ago. And so that's much earlier than typical. And when we saw that happen, we did see some shallow soil moisture recovery, right at the topsoil layers. But we did not see really anything of a response in the deeper soil layers or groundwater recovery with that snow melt. Additionally, we did not really see any recovery really in surface water. So that means to say we saw very little runoff into creeks, rivers, you know, stock ponds, livestock water, those kinds of things. And so we're still seeing some dryness out there. And like I said, we've heard from some fire folks, emergency manager folks, that they're concerned about some fire here because of lack of snow cover, and we're not quite in our traditional wet season yet. So we have a lot of dry fuels out there in what we call the shoulder season, in between our dry and wet season. So the drought monitor authors have not changed that D1 area, even though it might seem a little moist out there in the soils. We haven't seen quite extensive recovery from the long-term dryness and drought situation there in the east. And then also new this week is this D0 area in the north central, northwestern part of the state, and that goes up into North Dakota. So that would probably affect more of you guys that do more of the small grains and those kinds of things up in the north central part of the state. Again, that's kind of reflecting the last 90 days or so of warm temperatures and lack of moisture in that area. And further northwest, they did miss out on a lot of that moisture over that Christmas storm event. So that area has been a fair bit drier than the rest of the state. But no matter which way we look at it, or depending where you are, I guess, we're generally better off than we were a year ago. And this is where we were a year ago with dryness or drought covering all of the state. Yellow being dryness, the beige and the orange colors, some level of drought, either moderate or severe drought. So last year we did have quite a bit of improvement in recovery and drought conditions, but we're still lingering there in the southeast, and then the part in the Black Hills has kind of reemerged. And I think Julie might talk about this too as far as flood risk, but I'll just show this quickly about frost depth from our South Dakota mesonet stations. We have really thawed soils over much of the southern half of the state, not everywhere, but some of those frost layers are really quite slim with 1 to 4 inches. So we've seen with the very warm February that whatever soils we had frozen really aren't staying that way much anymore. Again, in the north, despite the warm temperatures, we still have frost in the ground, but it's really more shallow than we saw at the middle of that cold period in January, where we saw frost depths exceeding 2 feet in the north, exceeding 50 inches in the northwest. So we're starting to see that frost come out a little bit slowly with the warmer temperatures. Soil moisture is kind of another piece to the puzzle here as far as what we're looking at now and what kind of situation we're coming into with the spring season. This is soil moisture as of yesterday. The gray discs show frozen layers, so we don't show the moisture levels for those frozen layers, frozen sensors. But this poker chip map, as we call it, gives us a pretty good indicator. When we're looking at the blues and greens, that's a pretty good situation there as far as soil moisture goes. If you want to pick out your favorite part of the state here, the next slide I'm going to show you will be where we saw soil moisture at the end of December after that December Christmas storm event. But really, I think we're in adequate to good shape as far as soil moisture goes, as far as farming, cropping, all that stuff goes for the spring season. We do have some deeper layers with some drier soils, such as Dakota Lakes in the middle, a couple areas out west, and certainly see in the Northwest, some areas are still lingering pretty dry. So there, if you have interests in pasture, forage, range conditions, those tend to reflect some of the deeper soil moisture layers a little bit more than the annual crops. So just something to keep an eye on for those areas that are lingering a little drier in the deeper soil. But to get started for spring planting, I think we're in decent to good shape. So the next slide I'll show will be December. So from just about 2 months ago, after Christmas, and this is the soil moisture picture that we had at that time. Pretty similar, but you see more greens and blues in a lot of areas. So that means we've gained some soil moisture, moving from green to blue in a lot of areas. And also the plains out west. I don't know if we have many folks on here from western part of the state, but those areas have improved a fair bit more. But we're looking at, again, I'd say adequate to good situation of soil moisture. I'm not too worried about the start of the season. But I think we're really kind of, we don't have snow cover, and so we have this opportunity to potentially lose moisture between now and the next 4 to 6 weeks, till planting season really starts. And so that's something that we'll have to keep an eye on. And as you can expect, I think we'll rely on that on the wet season a little bit more, on those timely rains, to maintain the moisture we've got. We don't have a lot of excess in the system right now as far as surface water and that kind of thing to help carry us through should we get a dry drought period. So looking ahead, one of the things that has been a topic of conversation this whole winter has been El Nino. And as I alluded to earlier, I mentioned earlier, that has brought us, or it was a factor at least, in bringing us some very warm temperatures over this winter season. As we look out ahead, this is a bar graph showing what are the probabilities, what are the likelihoods or chances that we'll see La Nina, El Nino, or neutral, which is not something in between, in the coming seasons, the coming year. And so the letters at the bottom are indicating the month, or the 3-month season, I should say. So first on the left is January, February, March. Then we have February, March, April, May, and so on. So you see this red bar showing we're already in El Nino conditions, 100% probability, right? We already know that. That is going to drop off very quickly, especially as we look into the April, May, June period. So as we get in closer to that March, April time frame, we're seeing a very rapid, in fact, we were starting to see already in the Pacific Ocean some indicators already showing that this El Nino is starting to dissipate. So that is expected to happen pretty quickly here with neutral conditions or near average sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean during our summer season. And a decent chance here of a turn towards La Nina, the blue bars, by the winter season. So, remember we had 3 consecutive years of La Nina conditions. Now we have a very strong El Nino. Now it looks like we're going to see a flip back to La Nina conditions. The comment there on the right that I grabbed from the Climate Prediction Center, about 55% chance, so a little better than 50-50 odds of La Nina developing sometime later this year. So something to keep an eye on as we look ahead in the outlook. So looking of neutral conditions, so we're neither El Nino nor La Nina. We're somewhere in between, something near average sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean. And that's what we call neutral conditions. Pulling out some historical data, what does that mean for corn yield, for example? And it means maybe slightly good news. We don't see anything really strong one way or the other. Maybe a little more optimism there in the southeastern part of South Dakota, south central, South Dakota, a little higher potential for increased yields, but maybe slightly higher, slightly lower in eastern South Dakota, with the beige being a little lower yield, green a little higher. Again, not a lot to hang your hat on either way. And as we look at just what ENSO neutral means for temperature and precipitation, it really doesn't have any impact in our summer climate. So it really doesn't tell us much on the forecasting standpoint what that might mean. But here you go, looking at potentially good year, not necessarily a drought year again, which I think what people are maybe a little more fearful of. I don't see really necessarily a very severe, strong drought coming across again this summer. I just want to throw this in there too, and I've shared this with a few audiences. I've heard some chatter on the global markets as far as climate impacts in South America for their current growing season. And so I just wanted to say for December through February, that's the top graph. This is looking at global impacts of El Nino. And the top is December through February, our winter season. And looking at Brazil, for example, northern Brazil in the beige area, that often means dry conditions. In the southeastern part of Brazil, often means warmer conditions. So both of those point to challenging growing conditions, maybe potentially drought. So not unusual to see warm or dry conditions, or both, in parts of Brazil. For example, in December through February, as we look at June through August, again, some orange down here, southern Brazil, again, often leaning warmer side on El Nino, but again, we're moving towards neutral conditions, so that may not hold for this summer. But the winter is kind of what we're just coming to an end of closing out that season. So looking out ahead now, looking at the forecast, next 7 days, very little precipitation forecast. For South Dakota here in the middle of the country, you see some wet parts on the east and west in the next 7 days, but really very quiet here in the middle. Warmer than average temperatures, as you guys might have already seen. Looking at 10, 15, 20 degrees above average in some cases. So we're really going to end the month here warm and nothing really wet to speak of. As we look out into the first week of March, so this is 8 to 14 days out. Looking on the left there, temperature outlook, anticipating warmer than average temperatures from our area, basically eastward. Out west, they're looking at more cooler side of things with generally low pressure hanging out over the western states and over Canada and Alaska. And then precipitation, we see a little bit of hint of green shading there across South Dakota. Might see some chances of precipitation come through that first week in March, but nothing really confident at this point. Looking at March overall, and this outlook was released just a week ago on the 15th. For the month of March, looking at the northwest, some increased chances of warmer temperatures than average in that part of the state, but much of the rest, south, southeast, eastern, equal chances of warmer, cooler, or near average for temperature for the month ahead. On precipitation side, we do see increased odds, higher chances for wetter than average for the month of March in the southwest or south central part of the state. Hoping it can pick up some of that new drought area in the Black Hills as well. The rest of the state, not a lot of confidence, not a lot of consensus in the models as far as pointing towards wetter, drier, or near average. So there's equal chances of those for March. As we look at the coming spring season overall, March through May, we see more of the state favored or leaning towards warmer conditions in the spring season overall. That's on the left, with the exception of the southern tier region. And on the right, precipitation, that area that's favored to be wetter in March, does not look like that will hold necessarily through the spring. So really all of the states, equal chances of wetter, drier, or near average for the spring season. And that's as we approach our wet season, that really kicks up in April. Even I think if we get near typical, something near average moisture, that would be great news to keep us on the right track here for a good growing season moving forward. I think needless to say, a lot of things are pointing towards an early season, as we already, soil thawed in a lot of areas, no snow cover, temperatures are warming, so certainly be ready to be hitting the road running when you guys are ready, when the soils are sufficiently warmed up for planting. June through August, I wanted to throw this in there. They're not saying a lot on temperature, and that's been pretty consistent. They have not leaned really much on the warm, cool side, at all, for the heart of the summer, heart of the growing season. But something I did want to bring your attention to is on the right, the precipitation outlook for summer. There is a hint towards drier conditions here through the central and Pacific Northwest region. I will give this caveat, this grain of salt, that precipitation outlooks are more difficult in the summer for sure. But there's higher skill on the temperature side typically in the summer. But that they're even hinting anything at this point tells me they have some confidence in that drier signal, because this is still quite a ways out. We're looking at 3-4 months out yet. And so could see some dryness there mid-season. I didn't show the next window, which is July, August, September, but in the end of summer, we do see a little hint towards warmer conditions, at least for the end of summer season. So something to keep in mind. Looking at timing of planting and the potential dry season, a potential warm end to the growing season, are all maybe factors to think of. So plan for that. I think I'll skip some of this other stuff here. But I did just want to mention we did write an article, myself and Christine Lang, one of our horticulture folks, just about plant hardiness zones, really indicating that winters are getting warmer, and we see that reflected in the coldest temperatures in the winter, the average coldest temperatures. And this map was updated in November of just last year, so just a couple months ago. So we have a lot of zones moving northward. We see a lot of zone 5 stuff in the south. May not think that affects agriculture crops so much, but it can affect overwintering of pests and those kinds of things. And so something to think about, as maybe some of you have lawns and gardens as well, or friends who do that. We did see an update, and these plant hardiness zones are getting warmer in a lot of areas of the state. The mesonet, I know I'm down to my last minute or so. There's a lot of new stations coming on board. I'm visiting with them here over the winter. They've got big plans. 30 new stations potentially is their hope, to get 30 new stations in the ground this summer, and or update existing stations. So keep an eye out all summer long if you like the mesonet, and they're going to fill in a lot of those holes, a lot of those gaps here this summer, and I believe another 20 some next summer. So they're going gangbusters, shooting for a goal of 150 stations by 2027. With that, I'll stop there, and we can take a couple questions and transition to Julie.
There is a question in the Q&A. Do you have any formula? that can predict if dormant seeded or fall crops are likely to break dormancy or germinate?
Yep. So what we use for that typically is growing degree days. And you can put it from the date of planting. And then if you know, like for wheat, we have to use like 40 degrees as that threshold of when that seed might start emerging. So you can run a growing degree day tool on the Mesonet website. And I'll put that link in the chat here after I conclude my talk. And that's usually the indicator we use. And then each crop has their own kind of benchmark for physiological stage, with accumulated GDD units. All right, I'll stop sharing. And if you want to share that QR, or no, we're going to hold the QR code to the end, right?
Yeah, hold the QR code. I think did the poll go?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Well, Laura, I got excited for the corn market when you showed the drought monitor of Iowa. And then, of course, that excitement was tempered when you showed March, May, June precipitation outlook. So it's like, okay, we'll have to just wait and see. So, Julie, if you're ready and you could share your screen, and then we'll move into your presentation. Again, we have Julie Meyer, the senior hydrologist with the National Weather Service in the Missouri Basin River Forecast Center.
First off, I apologize for being a poor substitute for Kevin, but he is yesterday and today facilitating the Missouri Basin's forecaster meeting up at the Weather Service facility north of, up by the Kansas City airport. So he put the slides together and he gave me a script to read. So I apologize if I'm a little slow. The left-hand side of the graphic attempts to convey the percent difference in today's likelihood to reach minor flood stage compared to past historical events in the current model simulation. The plot on the right, because it's near and dear to my heart, because I'm the James River and Vermilion River forecaster, is just one of the stations that is on that plot, and that's James at Redfield. So, and basically it shows you the two lines, and we take the difference between the two to come up with the dots for the left-hand graph. But basically, this can give us an idea of where and what extent today's conditions are getting wetter or drier this year. So, or than usual. As one can see over the near 90-day outlook, and we sort of cheat in the Rocky Mountains. We're actually looking through end of water year for the mountainous area. The Missouri River Basin has a chance of a normal flood season or a below normal chance, which is the bluish areas, for reaching flood stage and having some flooding. It's going to be a boring year in the James, but I think we all need it after the last few years. Next slide. The Missouri River Basin is slowly coming out of a 3-year long drought period, 3 to 4 year long drought period. The current drought monitor classifies 20% of the Missouri River Basin as being in drought, while compared to last year, it was 63% of the Missouri Basin. Soil moisture conditions are looking at two different models. Yeah. The northern plains is probably in a slightly better and than the southern portion of the basin with, let's see. But there are still pockets of severe dryness in the basin. So we have been really dry and now we're much better, but still have some issues. Next slide. Warmer than normal temperatures, as Laura pointed out, of late have really thawed most of the ground for the southern half of South Dakota and further south. We still have some frozen ground up along the South Dakota, North Dakota border and veering into North Dakota. And there's still some frozen ground that we think there's frozen ground over in Montana based on our river modeling. Already stated that. Next slide. Courtesy of the NRCS, this shows the percent of 30-year average snow water equivalent in the mountainous West. Some basins have a historical low SWE according to the NRCS, and that's up in the higher elevations. We do not anticipate any flooding in the mountains due to snow melt only. It would take some rain on top of what snowpack there is to create some issues. Next slide. Just like the NRCS, the National Weather Service computes water supply outlooks. The National Weather Service outlooks are for the April through September period. Here we see the latest official outlook summary, which was issued on February 1st. We will run a new one on March 1st. For now, we expect a below normal mountain snow melt, below normal mountain runoff year. And let's see. Next slide. We look to the left-hand graphic, courtesy the National Weather Center's remote sensing folks, to see current snow water equivalent. And this is as of last week, so we've lost even more snow over the past few days across the plains. And let's see, plain snow melt is what, while there is still some plain snow, it's very shallow. And let's see, and it probably has likely less than 1 inch of SWE or less in it. And I've seen quite a bit of melt off still in the James, although it does indicate in my model run that there still might be some sparsely snow areas downstream of Columbia through Huron. But I think it's going to melt and mostly soak in from the looks of it based on some future runs, 30 days outlook I was looking at. The right-hand side graphic shows the plain SWE compared to the 19-year median SWE as computed by the no-risk folks, according to their, and they use a model called SNODAS. So the picture being painted here is that the SWE in the Northern Plains lies in the west. 10% of any years, 10% of all years of modeled record. And I apologize for being such a slow reader. But I thought his write-up was so good, I didn't try to memorize it. Next slide. Two more graphics to give a look on an idea of how shy we are of plain snow, which is, you already showed a lot of that, Laurel, with your slides. The graphic to the left, courtesy of the Midwest Regional Climate Center, gives the water year perspective of how much snow we have received, which is dismal. I think that's an understatement. The graphic to the right is sort of like the previous 19-year median average on that from the remote sensing folks on the previous slide, but this graphic shows MBRFC's 30-year record of modeling SWE and compared to today's modeled SWE. The thing to point out is that all the yellow and oranges and the white are areas of the Dakotas. The James and the Big Sioux, Big and Little Sioux, basically are devoid of snow, or they have pockets of snow. And that was what I was saying from the less than 20% of the areas, and now it's down to less than 10%. Next slide. And only 2 more slides to go. The final product, let's see, after setting the stage of any of this year's flood risk, is the way it is on this graphic that I'm trying to show to you. Basically, we are only outlooking flooding in the lower portion of the basins, which is typical, and that can be primarily due to spring rains and summer rains. And it is, so that's why we're calling for normal to below normal for flooding, and your area is mostly in the below normal area. So, and then last is a summary slide, which just stresses the key points on soil moisture, frost depth, the fact that we're looking for a below normal to normal flood season this spring. And that's all I have.
right, thank you, Julie. Are there any questions for Julie? I'll leave this slide up for a little bit. There's a lot of words on there.
Yeah, I thought I'd let them read it.
Sure.
But you stressed all the key points, a lot of the key points Kevin had on his notes for me, so I didn't want to. But the message is we're going to have a relatively quiet flood year. There could be some river ice that could cause some issues. The forecast for down here in Missouri is we have above normal highs through Tuesday, and then we go back to more typical temperatures for this area for this time of year, which means we'll be highs in the 40s. So I like an early spring, but I don't always like it because that usually means that summer comes sooner.
Yep, thanks, Julie. I believe we're going to share a QR code for
I'll
folks.
share
right,
the QR code here, maybe. Here we are.
While he's doing that, Julie, I have maybe one question for you. If we see some heavy rainfall events, what do you think is a risk of flooding? You know, it looks like our soils are not saturated, but not necessarily super dry either. What do you think about thunderstorm risk for flooding?
It's for the eastern half of South Dakota, I would say that we've trended to be wetter in the eastern half. So convective thunderstorm activity can create depending how widespread it is, can create some flooding. It might only reach into the minor, but we have had where we've had, trying to think, I should remember this. One of our more recent snowmelt seasons, we had massive flooding on the James River, but it quickly dropped off. And by summer, we were in like, are you sure there was snowmelt and rain this past spring? Because we're in really dry conditions. Yet I think it was September, I want to say it was in September, we had a hellacious convective thunderstorm event around one community on the James, and it created near record flooding for a short stretch of the James River. So just because there's no snowmelt doesn't mean there won't be any flooding. Generally, it's snowmelt with a precip event that creates the highest events on the James, which is the one I'm more familiar with, but also likely since the Big and Little Sioux are just to the east, they are in the same situation. I actually expect to see, if we did get some rainfall, I expect to see faster responses than I would if we were in a really dry year, because it takes a long time to fill up all the potholes and sloughs before I actually start seeing runoff. And even when the ground is frozen, unless it's extremely hard frozen ground, some of the runoff does actually soak in. So
good to know.
Does
Great.
that answer your question?
Yep. Yeah, I just always remember the summer of was it 2020 or 2021, where we had 14 inches at Frederick at the Elm River and brought flooding,
yes.
basically spring flooding in the Elm River and near Aberdeen, and yeah, so we can
With
still see
convective
flooding.
activity,
Yep.
it's really a wild card. I mean, I've been at the River Forecast Center since 1982. I was, until a few years ago, the primary forecaster for the upper Missouri above Fort Peck and the Milk River Basin, which parallels the Canadian border. And so I have forecasted pretty much every near record to record event in those two river basins over the past 40 years. So I'm all for a quiet year. The James is particularly challenging to forecast, and it inundates large areas due to backwater.
Yeah, I'm in the Aberdeen area. Jack knows the Jim River too, near Mitchell.
Yeah. I swear the river has two personalities. It does one thing from the North Dakota, South Dakota state line to Huron. And then below Huron, it behaves how I expect a river to behave. But between the state line and Huron, all bets are off. So it's a particularly tricky river to model. The North Dakota portion, if they have a big snowpack, that means the reservoirs fill up their flood control pools, and then they spend most of the summer into the fall trying to get back down to their normal pool level for the winter before they have to shut off their releases. So and ice jamming is a big deal, more so in the North Dakota portion of the James than the South Dakota portion. So it definitely has created a whole new set of, I may have been around a long time, but it gives me a whole new set of things, challenges from where I was more familiar with forecasting. Every forecaster has to know how to forecast every river in the Missouri Basin. And we have broken it up into 25 sub areas. So, but I definitely love the James.
We'll still take some questions. I see there's still 20 some folks on the call. If you guys have questions for myself or Julie, put them into the chat or the Q&A function. And Jack, how's that outlook make you feel about the lower James?
Well, it may not flood, but then it brings up the thunderstorm deal, and it's like, oh yeah, what can still happen?
Sorry, I
Just
did that
not
to you
the
again.
entire river. Just a portion of the river ends up, I mean, I would hope that we would never have a repeat, knock on wood, of getting a year's worth of rain in 2 days over the eastern half of the state like we did with Montana back in 2011. So it basically, the rain filled up the reservoirs, which had space for the snowmelt, and the snowmelt hadn't started big time yet. So where do you put the snowmelt runoff if you've already filled the reservoirs with the rainfall runoff? So
Downriver.
Yep, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
So
did you see the question in the chat, Laura? Is that something that to do directly with them, or is it something you can?
We have a couple minutes. Maybe I'll do that here.
Okay. Thank you, Julie.
Yep. Thanks, Julie.
And yeah, if there's another question, we'll just grab you. So.
Okay, doke.
Yep. Yeah, I'll share my screen here. So there was a question in the chat to ask if I could demonstrate how to use the growing degree day calculator. So I'm hoping you can see that screen there. So this is the growing degree day tool on the Mesonet website. And I use this menu here to choose a station. So I chose Groton just because it's nearby here. And I'll run it for last year. So let's say your planting date was May 15th. You can set that. And let's say we're at the end of the year at like October. So kind of that'll show everything. You can first choose a graph if you want to see the graphing option. And so this looks at growing degree days. This is base 50 of the cap 86. So that's basically like for corn. And the black line is what normal is. And so you can go through and see what the actual accumulated growing degree day units are, and then as compared to normal. We also have stress days and cooling degree days and heating degree days for other applications for like energy use and those kinds of things as well. So when you look at the table, you can see the actual numbers here of what the, like each day from May 15th onward, what the daily temperatures were, the growing degree day units for that day, and then what the accumulated is as you keep adding throughout the season. So the part we don't tell you is at what GDD accumulation does each crop go through a certain physiological stage, you know, like emergence, and so on. Thought we had a little more here. Let me look. Look here. Okay. So another way to look at this is if you go to tools and ag weather tool, that's this one. And here I chose Groton again for 2023, last growing season, just to show you a picture so it's easier to see. And scroll all the way down here to growing degree days. And this is where you can see some different temperature thresholds. So right now it's just showing the growing degree day base 50 accumulated for the season. If you want it, you can click over here and you just click on this GDD 40. That would be the base 40 temperature growing degree days, and then that will show as well. You can show what we consider as corn with base 50, max 86. And when you use your mouse over, you can see how all those compare from day to day. So that's another way to look at the growing degree day stuff. So hopefully that helps. Okay.
Well, thank people for joining us this week. And of course, the recordings will be available if you want to go back and look at some of it. And feel free to reach out to any of the presenters. They'll be glad to answer any individual questions that you may have. Next week, we have the forage week. So a few days on forage and insects that mess with the forage, and growing some forages and alternative forages for this coming year. So I think that's what we have. Anything else, Laura?
Just look for a survey in your email. You know, at the end of each week, we send out a survey to those that registered for the week. So we appreciate your feedback. That helps us get better and helps us improve what we do for next year as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Have a good week.
Thank you.